What's up? Good afternoon, evening, morning, wherever you are on the internet. I am so pleased to be here with you. This is broadcasting through a couple of my social media channels. I'm excited to be here. And I've got a special guest today, Chrissy King, who is an author extraordinaire. She's a few things extraordinaire. We're going to get into that because I want to give you guys the opportunity to get to know her a little better before we talk about this impactful piece of literature that she has dropped on us. A piece of literature, by the way, that called me out in several of its ideas. I was a little bit angry with you at parts of this book, Chrissy King. We'll get to that. We'll get to that. But I was also convicted for better understanding, to deploy better empathy, which I think is one of the reasons that she brought this phenomenal piece to us. But before we get into that, I like to let people introduce themselves. This will eventually become a podcast. And on podcasts, you often hear people giving an introduction to who the person is and what they think about them. But one of the things that I think is most important is to hear a person express out loud who they perceive themselves to be and how close they are living in existence to that self perception. So, Chrissy King, I've talked too much already, and I hope to not talk too much more than that. Would you please do us the honor of introducing yourself and telling us in your words who Chrissy King is?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you today. My name is Chrissy King. I'm a writer, speaker, educator. I do a lot of my work most of my work in the wellness space around creating an anti-racist and inclusive wellness industry. And I also focus a lot of my work on what I call body liberation, with the goal of helping us all find collective freedom and the ability to feel good in our bodies. I've been doing this work for quite a few years now. This is my first book, and it's definitely something that I've wanted to accomplish for a while, and just feel really honored to be able to put my work out in the world and to be able to come on and talk about it in so many ways with so many amazing people like yourself. So, yeah, thank you for having me.
I sincerely appreciate it. It's such a pleasure to have you here. So I want to get right into things, and you're on screen a lot more than I am in the context of this conversation. That's by design. People don't need to see me; they can hear me. That's plenty. I want to ask you a question about where really the book takes off, because this is important to understanding the sort of seeding for the flower that grew into this book, and that's your upbringing. This is really interesting to me in the context of the book. By the way, Chrissy, I'm in the South, Bible Belt, North Carolina, and my upbringing was basically rooted in Black and brown communities. So this is antithetical to the way that I grew up personally. So just share with us, sort of really quickly, what was your upbringing like? Where was it? And what was that transition like for you? Because you went from a situation where you're homeschooled in early years to being introduced to the school system, and the lack of diversity. Could you speak on that a little bit for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So I'm from the Midwest. Ironically, both of my parents are from the South, but they moved to Wisconsin before I was born. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, I grew up in Milwaukee, which Milwaukee in itself does have some diversity, but it's a very segregated city. And so, as you already spoke to, I was homeschooled till I was in the third grade. And then my parents sent me to a private Christian school. I come from a very religious background.
Mhm.
I thought it best that I go to a Christian school, and that school was in the suburbs. And so I was the only Black kid in my class. There were only two other Black kids in the school, which my brother and my sister. Um,
Right.
and also I was like 5'8" when I was in the third grade,
Right.
which is very tall for a third grader. And so I found myself in this school surrounded by like a sea of people, of other peers that were much smaller than me in physical presence. We're all
Mhm.
white, blonde hair, blue eyes. I had curly, kinky, curly, kinky hair. I was tall. I was
Mhm.
obviously Black, and so very felt very othered in that space. And I think for me, even going into that space was the first time that I was in a situation in which I recognized that people were going to form opinions about me because of my race. um,
Mhm.
and that the world would treat me sometimes differently because of that, or have different ideas about who I was as a person. And so that really formed my early relationship with my body image, but also just like beyond even that, it reformed like this idea of being excellent in everything I do, and respectability politics, although I didn't have the verbiage of language to call it that at that time. I felt in that space like I always had to prove myself, that I was as good as everyone else, and that, just and try to fit in whatever ways I could.
Mhm. The term you dropped in that explanation, othered.
Yeah.
There may be people out there listening to this
Mhm.
that don't really get that connotation.
Yeah.
Could you briefly just sort of help us understand what it, not only what the definition of that might be, but also, and more importantly from my perspective, how it feels to be
Yeah.
othered, because others have never been othered,
Yes.
that are listening out there, right? So
Yeah.
give us your quick and dirty on that.
Yeah, so when I say the term other, what I'm really referring to, at least from my own experience, is this idea of like not fitting in or feeling very different in the space from everyone else. Which, if you've ever been
Mhm,
in a space where you're the only one of something,
mhm,
it feels really different, and it feels like you're other. And not only that, it's the fact that, especially for me, being in that school, none of my peers had Black friends before me, right, or had really
right.
interacted with Black folks before me. And so simple,
Mhm,
not even simple things, but on the behalf of my peers, they were simple things like, why does your hair feel like this? Or why is your
mhm,
hair not straight? Or why does this, why do you do this thing? And so, really, because they didn't have an understanding of being around people different from themselves, I was
right,
always in this space where I felt like I was the one on the outside and having to have these experiences in which people made me feel like being who I was something that was really different. When in actuality, they just didn't know people like me.
right. You know, the context of this book is about liberation,
Mhm.
and we understand that, from just a simple standpoint of yin and yang. In order for liberation to happen, there must be first something that has bound us in a way,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
And again, this is fundamental to the context of what you've written here. And as a male, as a cisgendered heterosexual male coach who only works in women's spaces, my demographic is women over 30. I often refer to what I call a woman's shrinking years,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
The years of her life that the societal pressures have taught her that the best thing that you can do
Yeah.
is take up as little space as possible,
Mhm.
not only mentally, figuratively, but physically as well.
Yeah.
Talk to me about your shrinking years
Yeah.
as it relates, right? Because I was looking for photos for this particular broadcast, and I went through some of the photos from Chrissy King's shrinking years. You had an incident where you basically go to it. Well, first, you have these series of internal self-regulating thoughts,
Mhm.
and eventually that blossomed into you going to a trainer and effectively saying, make me small.
Yeah.
Can you give us a little understanding of that period of your life, what the impetus was for that, and how that eventually played out for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I talk about in the book that my first like big attempt at dieting when I was like 16, probably at the time, 16 or 17.
Hmm.
And I had a situation at school in which one of my peers, a young man, made a joke in front of other classmates about the fact that I had gained some weight. And so
Hmm.
that really was like embarrassing moment for me. And also I knew, I think, at that time that I had gained weight, but it didn't necessarily like bother me. I wasn't thinking of it as like a bad thing.
Right.
Or maybe I don't know, but when he said that though, I was like, "Oh, this is a problem that I need to fix," right? And so I drove to the bookstore, I purchased the book on Atkins diet. I followed it religiously. I lost 30 pounds fairly quickly, and then all my peers at school were like, "Oh my gosh, you look so great." And that was like the start of my yo-yo dieting, which lasted for like the next decade. However, I will preface this and say that, later in life found a journal from when I was like 12, and in the journal, I was already talking about weight loss and about tracking how much I was eating. So obviously, this had also been on my mind before that
Hmm.
incident. But so that was like that was a big yo-yo diet, or it was the start of my yo-yo dieting phase. And I did like things that were very extreme to lose weight. Then I could never maintain it, and so I would just be up and down in my weight, up and down in my weight. And so when I was in my 20s and finally hired a trainer, in my mind, I was like, okay, this is the time that I want this person, this professional, right, to help
Hmm.
me get skinny and be able to stay that way for my life. Because my goal was like, I don't want to keep doing this yo-yo thing, right? So like I need to get a professional, I need to get in the gym, I need to start working out. I need to tell them what I need them to tell me what to eat. And this is like this is when I'm gonna like get skinny and stay that way forever. Yeah,
Right, right. And and that was a gateway of sorts for you
yeah,
because according to what you write in the book, you go from that a real leads you to sort of a powerlifting
yeah.
phase, right? So give us a little bit of insight about that and how you feel switching from the aesthetics to powerlifting sort of cracked the door to liberation for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So that first trainer I had at the gym, I started strength training with her, but we just used like dumbbells and like body weight stuff. We never used barbells.
Hmm.
And so what actually happened is that trainer had a boyfriend who opened his own strength and conditioning gym. And so we started training at the strength and conditioning gym.
Hmm.
And her boyfriend, I would see him working with clients, and his women clients were like barbell deadlifting and squatting and bench pressing. And I thought, wow, that looks really cool. But again, I never engaged with that with my trainer. So they end up breaking up. She stops training altogether. I end up staying at the gym. And at first I'm just doing like their boot camp classes.
Hmm.
And for whatever reason, the owner, her ex-boyfriend, he one day approached me and he was like, I think you should try barbell deadlift or barbell work. And I was like, I don't know if I could do it. And he's like, of course you can. So he shows me how to deadlift. That was the first lift he showed me.
Hmm.
And I like fell in love with it right away. And so then he taught me how to squat and he taught me how to bench press. And I started lifting and I just like fell in love with it. And I eventually ended up going to a different gym, very much the same type of work. At that gym, it was a very powerlifting community at the gym.
Right.
And so that's how I got into competing. And so what's so interesting about it is that when I first had that first session with my personal trainer, I couldn't even do like a push up. Like, I had like very limited strength in terms of like what my body could do. And by the time
Hmm.
I started powerlifting, I had just like learned all this new appreciation for my body and also understood that like strength is a skill just like any other skill and it can be developed. And so through powerlifting, I ended up competing, and then I went from not being able to do push-ups to being able to like deadlift up to 500 pounds and squat over 300 pounds and bench press like 185 pounds. I was competing and it was awesome. And so I
Yes.
think that was the first part which I started to think like, oh, my body is more than just an ornament for decoration. It's also really powerful, and there's so many things I can also do with my body.
I love it. I love it. That's a really great story. And one thing that I've often said about working in this space with women is that there's a definite shift from trying your best to shrink to lifting something that's your body weight and introducing yourself to power, not only power but self-contained power that the world typically frowns upon allowing you access to, because we know that diet culture is a means of control. I won't get too far into that because I want to keep the conversation moving, but that could be a separate podcast in and of itself. Um,
Absolutely.
but I want to talk about you finding that liberation and you're working your way through what's effectively the liberation of Chrissy King at that time in your life. And in the context of self-care, there's this really monumental retreat for women of color, which starts a big transition in your life because you have a God sent, universally divine vision. I'm assuming absent ayahuasca.
Yes.
Uh,
There was no ayahuasca
right,
involved.
no ayahuasca involved. And you see a future that is so antithetical to what you're experiencing.
Yeah.
Talk to us about that vision.
Yeah, absolutely. So I had met a peer on social media. We really didn't even know each other well yet, but I was living in Wisconsin at the time. My
Hmm.
peer, who is now my best friend, is living here in New York. And I just noticed that she was having a 1-day retreat for women of color. And I hit her up, like a person I barely knew. And I was like, hey, I'm thinking about coming to your retreat, which to be honest, I don't even know why. I was going to go from Wisconsin to New York for a 1-day retreat.
Right, right.
When hindsight, that makes no sense. But anyway, she's like, you should come, you can stay with me. And I was like, perfect. So I go to this retreat, and she does this she's an amazing life coach. and she does this future you visualization.
Hmm.
And it was like future you was like 5 or 10 years. You're envisioning yourself 5 or 10 years in the future. I'm not a big meditation person at that time.
Right.
And I was like, okay, let's just see what happens. And it ended up being like a 20-minute guided meditation. And I go into this very, very deep visualization. And when we, woke up, we finished or whatever, I was like, wow, that was really weird because in my visualization, I was living in New York. I was single. Now, mind you, I was married at the time I had this visualization. So that's a big piece. And number three, I was like writing books, like as a profession. That was like my full time thing. And at the time, I was still working at my corporate job. So none of that made any sense whatsoever, but it felt so real that it was like very jarring for me at the time.
I love this so much, partly because it was complete opposite of what your life was at the time.
Complete opposite.
But the other thing that I love so much, Chrissy, and I've heard you talk about this in other spaces, was you did not decide at that point to immediately force yourself into, you didn't start questioning your relationship. You didn't start reaching out to publishers because of this vision. You just sort of rolled with it. Um,
I
you know,
honestly just tucked it away as like this thing that happened. And I was like, that was weird, but okay. And then just kept moving on with life.
I love that so much. So this leads to another really interesting and awesome set of circumstances. You write this article, right, for
Mhm.
Shape,
Yeah.
right? Admittedly, didn't pay that well.
No,
What
definitely did not pay that well.
definitely did not pay that well. Not a huge deal, but it
No.
goes viral,
Yeah.
right? The nature of the internet, the nature of your skill as a writer, which
Thank you.
maybe you weren't as keyed in on at the time, because there's a series of things that happened after this
Yeah.
that you're fairly shocked by. So let's talk about article
Yes.
to national television
Yeah.
opportunity to book deal, because I want people to understand how the universe guided you and how you flowed with it, how you rode that wave into this book that we're going to talk about in a few minutes. What happened after that article?
So this is 2020 now. Spoiler, I had already left that relationship. So I had already left the relationship and moved to New York. And I wrote this article that, as you just stated, did not pay me very much. And I thought it was like a cool article. It was entitled like, "What's it like to be a Black body positive fitness trainer?" It
Mhm,
wasn't even about me. I featured three other trainers, Black
mhm.
women. And yes, the article goes viral, which was kind of surprising to me. It's not that I didn't think it was good, but I was just like, wow, this went viral. Okay. So then the article goes viral. The Today Show reaches out and asks me to come on and talk about the article. And I was like, of course. Now it's during pandemic time. So it was a virtual interview, but it was great. It was an amazing interview. And then a couple of weeks later, a publisher reaches out to me like via email and was like, hey, I saw you on the Today Show. I'm just wondering if you'd ever be interested in writing a book. And at first I was like, this sounds like a scam. Like nobody emails you and asks you questions like that. And I remember screenshotting it, sending it to my best friend. And she's like, well, you won't know if you don't email back. So I was like, okay. So I email back, I get on the phone with this gentleman. We have a talk for like probably 30 minutes. And I tell him just like loosely in because I hadn't really like formulated exactly what the book would be about it because it wasn't like top of mind, like that I was going to write a book.
Right.
So I talked to him about like what I would like to write a book about. And he's like, that sounds great. He's like, send me a couple paragraphs. I'm going to pitch it to the sales team. And I was like, oh my gosh, I think this is actually for real. And so I reached out to a peer that I knew through social media and I said, hey, can I pay you for a call? Because this person is published with, self published and published with an author, a publisher. And she was like, absolutely. So I pay her for the call. I get on, I tell her the story, and she's like, this is amazing. You need an agent. And I was like, great. Where do you get one of those at? Right. And so she's like, listen, I know a really good agent. I don't know if they want to work with you, but I will connect you. And so then she connects us. I get on the phone with the agent the next day. The agent immediately says, yes, they want to work with me, which in hindsight, none of this makes any sense because that is not how things work. Okay.
Never.
Never works this way. So it makes no sense. And the universe was really opening doors for me. So we, decide to work together. We sign a contract. The publisher comes back the next day. I connect them and the publisher gives me an offer. And my book agent was like, okay, Chrissy, here's the deal. She's like, this is a decent offer for a first time author. She's like, but you haven't even written a book proposal. You haven't done all the things. She's like, I think that we should go back to the table, write a book proposal, and then do this the right way. And so I'm like, I don't know anything about publishing. I trust you. So turn the deal down. She introduces me to someone to help me write the book proposal. Ends up that I this person she recommended to, which is amazing. I'd work with them 1,000 times over, but I find out that it's going to cost me $10,000 to work with this person. And I was like, I just turned down money and now I'm paying money. But I'm like, all right, I'm going to trust the process. So I do it. I write the book proposal. It takes me about 3 months. A book proposal ends up being like a 100-page document. Didn't know that. So it was a whole thing. So I finally finished the proposal, take it back to my agent. She shops it around. I end up getting 5 offers from 6 major publishing houses. And the deal that I end up signing is 5 times what the original publisher offered me.
Now, there's another piece to this story. It's like I feel like it's almost like Hansel and Gretel, and you're walking your way out of the woods because the universe left all these breadcrumbs for you.
Yeah.
Yep, you're on the right path, Chrissy. Yep, keep
Yeah.
going, Chrissy. So there's another piece of this deal that involves two dope chicks.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
which further confirmed that you were in the right place. So, talk to us a little bit about who the publishing actually went through and
Yeah.
how you were surprised
Yeah.
by a hero of yours in
Yeah.
this context, because this is amazing to me. Tell us
Yeah.
a little bit about that.
So all of the meetings with the publishers were via Zoom, and so this one particular, I knew I was meeting with Penguin Random House, an imprint of Penguin Random House. That's all the details I had. I didn't know anything more than that. And so typically, this was like my fourth or fifth call, and typically on the Zoom, it's like one person from the publisher, maybe two max, right? Like maybe the editor and one other person. I get on this particular call, and there's already 5 people on the Zoom plus my plus my agent. I was like, whoa, it's a full house, right? So I was already like a little bit nervous because I was like, oh, I wasn't expecting so many people. And so they did a little intro, and then all of a sudden, like, we have a special guest that we wants to say hi. And I'm like, who would want to be a special guest that want to say hi to me? And it was Phoebe Robinson of Two Dope Queens, who
Sheesh.
was like, I'm a huge fan of her work. And I didn't realize that this was her imprint. And so she pops on to just talk to me for a few minutes, tell me that she read the proposal and that she's so excited and would like love to, work with me. And so then she didn't stay for the whole call, but I was just like, first off, I had a whole fangirl moment. I have zero chill.
Right,
I'm just like, not that cool. So
right.
I totally had a little fangirl moment before I composed myself. And then we finished the call. And as soon as I hung up the call, I called my agent and I said, this is the team I want to work with. And it wasn't just because Phoebe came and surprised me. It was because of like the energy and the conviction that I felt and with the whole team. And so I said, I don't care what happens. This is the team I want to work with. And I was so grateful that they, gave me an offer. And I also, I don't know if I've said this before, but the thing that's really cool about this decision I made was also that wasn't even the highest offer on the table.
Mhm.
But I felt like this was the right team for me to be with. And energetically, it has been such a great match from beginning to end, like every step of the way. And it just felt like synergetically, like this is exactly who I was supposed to be working with.
Man, it's just a beautiful story about taking the next step.
Yeah.
And as a male working in the space where I'm working with women, probably 99.9% of the time, I've learned to correct myself unabashedly. Phoebe and Chrissy, please allow me to apologize for ever calling two dope queens, two dope chicks. I
Oh,
caught that as I said it. Hey, look, Chrissy, I'm at the point now in this space where I know it's just better to be humble, efficient, and quick with apology. And
honestly,
I miss
I didn't even notice it, but yes, thank you.
I notice everything that I say. I try to be very, very, very disciplined in what I say and what I don't because it's important. And sidebar. I don't know when I may say something flippantly that could carry on with a human for years of their life that I didn't even intend to say. So I like to be mindful of what I say. In any case, thank you
Yeah.
for that respite. Thank you for your grace, Phoebe and Chrissy. But in any case, when we talk about liberation, we talk about a freeing of ourselves. You have a great quote about liberation. I think came from Audre Lorde. Something about unless we're all free, none of it. Can you throw that quote out for us? How does that go?
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably gonna mess it up too,
That's all
but
right.
basically, essentially, the quote is like, "None of us are free unless all of us are free, even when our chains are different." So even if the issues that we're dealing with are different, our liberation is collective, and I think that's something that's so important that we, as a culture and a society, need to think more about. Is that we think so much about our individual freedom and our individual, but none of us are free unless all of us are free.
And I asked that question and I submit that quote because it's a segue to my next question, which is you found your liberation. you did a lot of work to get there.
Yeah.
And once you escaped that situation, you decided, I'm going to go back and get some more people, right? I'm going to sit down because writing a book is not like writing an article. And as you got into being an author in this capacity, you just articulated to us, I didn't know what the hell was going on. Like, they
Mm-mm.
asked me for this thing in 100-page document and get an agent. I don't know shit about this.
Yeah.
But you decided to endeavor into that, you know, the railroad of sorts. You went back to get people. Why did you need to write this book? Why
Yeah.
did it need to come out of you? Why was it important that after you found your liberation, you produced a manuscript, a map for other people to do
Yeah.
the same thing? Why was that important to you?
Wow, thank you. I love the way that you asked that question. It was so important to me because, and first off, let me clarify, writing a book is not like writing an article. I
Right.
definitely knew what I was getting myself into.
Facts.
I was like, oh my gosh, what have I decided to do? But I felt like I needed to write this book because I know how much finding freedom and liberation, how much that changed for me, right? I know
Hmm.
that when I was in the depths of diet culture, when I was like always obsessing about shrinking myself and controlling my body and changing myself, I had no energy left over to do anything in the world, right?
Right.
And I had no, I couldn't have done like liberation really helped me change my entire trajectory of my life.
Hmm.
'Cause all of my energy was being sucked and drained into the pursuit of, being smaller. And when I changed that relationship, I realized how much my life changed. And I said, wow, what could millions of liberated people do if we were walking around free and liberated and
Hmm.
using our energy in service of our soul's purpose versus an energy or using that energy in service of shrinking ourselves and keeping ourselves small. And I was like, wow, I know how much it's done for me, and I want other people to experience that for themselves. And, as work, I used to be a coach and a trainer as well. And I work with so many
Hmm.
clients who were also in the same place that I used to be, right? And
Hmm.
obsessing about bodies and wanting to shrink themselves. And I was like, what would freedom for all of us look like? And when I wrote the book, I was like, if I can help one person along that journey, it's worth it for me. And I hope to hope a lot more than that. But I was just like, people need to experience this kind of freedom because it's truly life changing in every aspect in terms of like just your creative capacity, but like in exploring pleasure in all these different arenas of life, just being truly
Hmm.
present in your experiences. And I just wanted more people to have that experience.
I love that answer. By the way, I'm a religious kid. Also, I'm in the Bible
Yeah.
Belt. I'm a PK, so a lot of I hope that informed you a lot about what my attitude is and why I act that the way that I do, the good and the bad. But there was one of my grandmother's favorite sort of songs, hymnals was "If I can help somebody as I
Mhm.
travel along, then my
Mm.
living will not be in vain." And what you just said reminded me of that. Now I'll be cursing in the next 15 to 20 minutes, listeners. So
Get
it,
it. I
yeah,
get it.
accept my duality here. He's not through with me
Duality.
yet. uh,
Yes.
Chrissy, you feel me? So I want to take that into just a few quick things because I want to talk about some subject from the book. But when you talk about that liberation, one of the things that pops up in my mind is that decision that you made to go to Spain, right?
Mm,
And I'm
yeah.
thinking, and I know on several levels, um, get me skinny, Chrissy would not have
Mm,
made that trip for multiple reasons. But can you
yeah.
just talk about a little bit about the act of giving in to the universal flow and the enjoyment of not being so fixated with fitting into a societal standard?
Yeah.
I know this is a loaded question, but you're a hyper intelligent individual who drips words like a faucet, so you'll have no problem answering that. But give us a little insight about how that feels for you and how much better it's made your life in sort of all contexts.
Yeah, absolutely. So in 2019, I got invited to go to Spain with a group of other Black women who I didn't know, most of them. One of them who organized the trip I had met briefly once, didn't know anybody else who was going on the trip. And I
Hmm.
would jump to the opportunity. I was like, absolutely, I'm definitely going to come. old Chrissy, pre-liberated Chrissy, would not have wanted to do that for several reasons. Number one, going out of the country for a week means that I'm not going to have control to what I control, absolute total control over what I'm eating, which was a big thing for me in the past. Number two,
Right.
I'm going to go hang out with people I don't know. I'm going to be worried about, old Chrissy would have been worried about what she looks like. Are
Hmm.
people going to judge her body? Are people going to have all these thoughts about her? And so all those things. So I go to Spain with these group of women I don't know, and I'm sitting there, like, first off, I had the time of my life, like, the entire Spain is it was
Right.
in Madrid, I had the time of my life, but I've had this particular moment where I'm sitting at dinner and I'm looking, we're all, like, eating at this restaurant, like, all this food in front of us, so we're having paella and all this amazing food and wine, and, every morning we're having fresh croissants, like, we're just having such a great time, and I have this moment where I'm sitting there and it's like, "Wow, this is what freedom feels like," right? That I'm able to be here, be comfortable in my body. There's no me talking about how I have to like work this off when I get home next week. I'm not worrying about what I'm eating, right? I'm just like, wow, I'm so grateful for this experience. I'm so grateful that I got to meet these new people. I'm having the time of my life. I'm having some of the best food of my life. And I was like, oh, this is what freedom feels like. This is what I was missing all those years. And it was such a transformational moment when I realized like how far I'd come in my journey, and I was like, "Oh, this is what I want for the rest of my life. I wanna be able to experience life, create memories," because the reality is at the end of our lives, we all are gonna die. I know it's like no one wants to talk about that, but it's the truth, right? And on my
Hmm.
deathbed, the thing I'm not gonna be thinking about like, "Oh, I wish I had have been skinnier my whole life. I wish my body had have been different." I'm gonna be thinking about all the memories that I shared with people that I truly loved, and that's what they're gonna be thinking about too. And so why would I wanna waste the best moments, the best experiences of my life wishing my body was something different versus just being, well, I'm so grateful for this experience that I'm in right now and this memory that I'm creating.
Hmm. Absolutely. And I want to interject one more question in, and I promise we're going to get to
Sure.
some of these concepts in the book, because we have a shared experience in that we have both dealt with loss,
Mhm.
right? And I want to preface this with my own personal, um, you know, journey into loss, so that the question doesn't seem so scientific and callous, because I don't mean it that way, but I just want to ask the question thoroughly. So I'm in this space because I lost my mother, I lost my older sister, my younger sister, and my brother.
Wow.
Right. And what I found from loss is that in 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 the absence of the grief, it is in and of itself a liberating act, because for me, there was a reduction of anxiety and fear over my individual choices that was replaced with, bro, you're not going to be here forever,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
Do you want to live smaller
Yeah.
with less risk? I'm at the point now where regret scares the shit out of me.
Mhm.
Um, Risk, not at all. And before you made a move from the Midwest to New York
Mhm.
City, right? You lost your father.
Yeah.
D- How can I put it? Do you feel as if loss also informed some of your liberation? I'm curious about
I
that.
do, in the sense that, like, yes, I agree with you, right? Losing my father, very unexpected, very tragic, wasn't something any of us planned for. Um, Definitely informed some of my liberation because you recognize again that life and so like we try so hard to have control over every aspect of our lives, right? And even when it comes to our health and wellness, right? We're like, I'm gonna eat the right way, I'm gonna exercise, I'm gonna do this, this, and this because I then can control the outcome I have in life. And then when you recognize that ultimately, as much as we try, we really don't have control over any of the things that we aspire to, like very limited control, right?
Mhm.
So many facets of are out of our control. And so moving to New York and like deciding to pursue this next part of my life, I was like, what do I really have to lose at the end of the day, right? Like I can
Right,
try this thing, and if it doesn't work or if I don't find my way in New York, I can just always go back to where I came from.
right.
But life is going to keep moving, and I am going to take my last breath at some moment. So yeah, it liberated me to just try the thing and do the thing, and to live a little bit more fearlessly. Absolutely.
Similar experience for me. Let's go into some concepts from the book, and let's get really sticky with the this conversation, because there are two words that come to mind in this book: one supremacy,
Mhm.
one privilege,
Yeah.
And then there's a specific word that if you put in front of those two
Yes.
words, it causes it causes all the feathers to ruffle,
Yes.
right? And you dive head first into these concepts. So first, can we talk about something that I find particularly annoying on the internet and had not been able to articulate it until I read the book? But the thought of individual body, personal body image
Mhm.
versus systemic oppression of a body
Yeah. Yeah.
and how those two differentiate.
Yeah, absolutely.
Speak as freely as you like about that topic.
Yeah, so one of the things that happens often when I talk about, body positivity, that space, or some of the nuances in that space, or the issues at that space, and that, it's oftentimes centering the wrong people because the body positivity space was originally founded by fat Black and brown women. I get a lot of like negative comments saying, "But
Mhm.
I have body image issues too as a thinner white woman." And so that's why I make a really clear point to differentiate the 2 in the book. Body image is just like a personal issue that you have with your body. All of us in some capacity probably have body image issues, right? Maybe you don't like the cellulite you have in your thighs. Maybe you don't like the stretch marks on your stomach. Those are real issues, and I never, make light of those things that you're struggling with personally. However, there's a real difference from having a personal body image issue, like not liking your cellulite or not liking your stretch marks, to living in a body that is systemically oppressed because of it. So, if you're living in a
Mhm.
fat body, if you're living in a trans body, if you're living in a Black body, right, there's systemic oppression that goes along with just existing in that body. And that is a very different experience than saying, I don't like the fact that I have stretch marks. And so, I think that when we're approaching this conversation, we always have to be really mindful of those are 2 very different experiences. And that even if you have stretch marks, if you live in a thinner white body and yes, you have stretch marks and you don't like that personally, you're not going to experience oppression in the world because of those stretch marks. And so I think that we can have these conversations that can feel very nuanced, but we have to start with this like very real understanding of the different experiences that people are having.
It's a brilliant and much more in-depth way that you go into that in the book. And for I'm going to be giving away 3 of your books at the end of this podcast, but it it reads almost instructional for the reader, but only if the reader is willing to apply humility and empathy to shift their thought process. And all too often, we first feel attacked and secondly feel informed,
Mhm.
and that's challenging. But you beat that drum consistently through like the back half of this book,
Yeah.
and I mean that as a compliment. And that brings me to another sort of section of the book, and a mention of sort of being willing to acknowledge the harm that you cause as an individual who may have their varying levels of privilege. There's levels to this shit.
Yep.
There's varying levels of privilege.
Mhm.
Everybody has some. There is an apex of privilege in our
Of
society,
course.
but yeah, of course. But um, talk to us. A quote that I came by, and one of my mentors gave me. I think it's from I can't remember who it's from, but the quote is, "It's difficult to get a man to understand something
Mm.
when his income depends on his not understanding
Yeah.
it."
That's it right there.
That's it right there.
Yeah.
Talk to me about the black squares of 2020, the Chrissy, can you come speak
Mhm.
at our company for free, maybe
Mhm.
2020.
Yeah.
The time I got rich off of
They
the year that racism made me rich, I think is how you phrase
yeah.
the Impossible book.
Mhm.
Give us a little insight into the performative nature of the body positivity movement and your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I mean, I first want to acknowledge something that you said at the beginning, right? This idea of privilege and that all of us have privilege, right? And so when you put that word white in front of privilege, it gets very sensitive for some people. But the reality is that we all have privilege, and some
Hmm.
of us more than others. It doesn't make us
Hmm.
bad people. It's just the reality of the white supremacist culture that we live in. And I think it's always important to point out that we can both be privileged and oppressed at the same time. Even myself hold lots of privileges, right? And in lots of ways, it could be considered oppressed. So that's something that we all have. But when it comes to 2020, it was such a wild time because, for one, what happened with George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd was the impetus, right, for this resurgence of
Mhm.
anti racism, this resurgence of interest in DEI. And it's such an interesting thing because George Floyd was not the first George. I mean, he was the first George Floyd, but this is not the first instance, right,
Right.
of police brutality or violence against Black people in this country. But it was like I liken it to just like because of COVID, because we were in the house, because there's less things for us to focus on. It became this global awakening, so to speak. But in so many ways, it was very reactionary for a lot of people, right? And so we see, like,
Mhm.
yes, everyone's putting the black squares up. Everyone's like, we need you to come talk about anti-racism today. It's an emergency. I actually remember this one particular, and let me just backtrack a little bit. I've been talking about anti-racism and wellness and DEI and wellness well before George Floyd, right? But when
Mhm.
George Floyd happened, that's when the mainstream wellness society was like, or wellness industry was like, oh my gosh, racism is a problem, right? It's
Mhm.
always been a problem. But I remember this one particular day, this woman actually emailed me 4 times, like within an hour, because she needed me to come talk to her company that day because they were having an emergency. And I declined. I was like, no, I will not come talk to you today. I'm not your, I didn't even know this person, right? But I think that so many people were very reactionary during that time period because no
Mhm.
one wanted to get it wrong and no one wanted to be on the wrong side of history, right? But what we saw during 2020 was everyone waking up essentially in their minds to the reality of racism being a thing and then wanting to like fix it right away.
Mhm.
The problem with that mentality is that white supremacy is not something that you fix by taking a course or a workshop, right? Or reading a book. Like, yes, those things can inform your education and your mindset so that you can work towards actually dismantling white supremacy and creating anti racist spaces. But so many people took it as an opportunity to like check the box, right? And so now, 3 years later, I look back at some of the same people I work with, or organizations, or just the industry as a whole, and I don't see that continued ongoing commitment to change that so many people embarked on in 2020. And again, it's because if you're doing something out of the space of like, I want to fix this thing, I want to feel better, I
Mhm.
want to be, a good person, you're going to really struggle with doing the long-term work of anti-racism and dismantling white supremacy because in reality, the actions that are required to actually make change oftentimes feel like oppression if you're used to being in a position of privilege, right? Or to the quote that you spoke to before, when it comes to like living in a capitalist society, if you have to make decisions that mean you're going to personally make less money or you're personally not going to profit as much, then it's like, do I really want this system to change? Because ultimately the system is really benefiting me. And having it be dismantled is going to cause me to be uncomfortable. And it's also going to cause me to feel like I'm losing access to something, right? Because that's what
Mhm.
privilege is. This is access to all these different things that
Mhm.
honestly feel nice sometimes if we're being realistic about it. And so it was a wild, wild time. And I think I like to think I did a lot of, I know I did a lot of good work. I like to think that some of it has some lasting impact. And I also see
Mhm.
a lot of ways that I felt like for people, it was like a blip in time. And now, it's back to business as usual.
Absolutely. Upton Sinclair is the author of that quote, by the way. I could be smooth and pretend like I remembered it, but I looked at my phone while you were talking. Um, let's just be transparent here. We're all family here. So, you know, I want to talk about some of the ways that you totally pissed me off in this book.
Oh, yes. Please
Yeah,
tell
let's
me.
let's
You know
let's
what?
get into that.
You're the first person to tell me this. So I'm excited to hear. No one has
Because
told me this so far.
people don't like to confront themselves, right? And let me be clear. I do my research. If I'm going to talk to somebody, especially somebody who's well, everybody. I value everybody's time, but somebody that I know is as busy as you. I mean, for God's sake, I saw you in Tamron Hall. Somebody as busy as you. I'm going to make sure that I don't waste your time in a conversation. Also, I listen to enough interviews to hear people dodging their conviction
Yeah.
in the interviews. I mean, it's palpable. I can hear you avoiding interacting with Chrissy King about this thing that you're convicted by. So the first time you pissed me off, you said one of my go-to phrases: "Thank your body for what it can do." That's
Mm.
one of my go-to phrases, Chris. Oh, I love that because just to me, it's so brilliant and antithetical to diet culture. I'm not talking about you getting skinny. I'm a high level thinking coach. I'm an empath. I'm cultured. Why not celebrate what your body can do? and you corrected me on that in this book. Can you talk a little bit about the challenge in that statement? What level of privilege I'm coming from by articulating that, and how it might be better considered?
I mean, first of all, I used to say the same thing. So
Right.
let me just also, I used to be the biggest proponent of saying that. And again, I think there is, and I absolutely believe that we should be grateful to our bodies for what it can do. You know what I'm saying? I'm grateful to my body all the time for everything that it can do. However, when we, use those statements, right, as like, yeah, the antithesis to diet culture, it's like, oh yeah, it's not about what you look like, it's what your body can do. Without recognizing that there's a level of ableism in that statement because a lot of our bodies can't perform the same, right? There's some people who can't do, their body can't perform in the way that we're even talking about, like go for a run or go for a walk. Some people can't do that. And so again, my point in saying that is not to be like, oh, we're all getting it wrong. It's just to say, oh, again, we all have these levels of privilege. And sometimes when we're thinking through our own perspective, we say things without recognizing the privilege in our own statements. And I think it's also so important, for all of us to recognize that while it's so important to be grateful for what our bodies can do, also recognize that when we're talking about body liberation, we're coming to this place of like, I'm going to work to accept my body in all of its iterations, then we recognize our physical abilities come in different iterations too, right? And again, things we can't control, chronic illness, disease, accidents, injuries, all these things will happen, may happen. So it's also like, if my body is not able to perform in the way that it used to be able to perform, how do I also still work to accept and value and appreciate my body in this new iteration of it? And so, it's just always, again, it's the work is to always be thinking through the perspective of other people. And when we're approaching, whether working as trainers and clients and coaches or whatever we're doing in life, is to always work through an intersectional approach. And so that means like looking through the perspectives of other people and what their experience in the world might be.
Absolutely. And first of all, it's a great explanation in that small soundbite of what you go into detail about in the book. So I appreciate you doing that. And it's important for us to be challenged in ways that cause us to give thought to our daily actions. That's sort of the uprooting, the dismantling of a lot of these systemic things. It's also the work that seems most challenging for most people.
Mhm.
But as a coach, and by the way, I my first introduction to you was through Molly Galbraith and Girls Gone Strong. Great organization, and then began to follow things. I think we co-contributed to some small article through Karina Inkster, um, and and but what I want to talk about now is the coach in you and how that translates, because you have very specific sections at the end of each chapter from principle to practice, which is so meaningful for me because oftentimes we read a book, a piece of literature, and
Mhm.
although it's informative, it doesn't lead us to practice in a way that actually improves the situation, standard, or circumstance that the book is talking about. Tell us first what principle to practice is, and second, why it was important for you to include that in your book.
Absolutely. So, principle to practice is a section at the end of every single chapter that includes journal questions, prompts, journal prompts, questions, or just like exercises and activities for you to do with the purpose of really helping to like really take the material that you're reading and like put it into practice in practical ways. This was so important for me. I wish I would say I made this up myself, but I didn't. Layla Saad, who is the author of the book Me and White Supremacy, an amazing book. I read her book, and at the end of every chapter, she had reflection questions, and I thought it was just so so powerful, especially for a topic like white supremacy, right? That is like overwhelming and can feel really big and hard to like to break down. She had these questions that were like, oh yes, this is simple, not even simple, but these are ways that I can think about the material and how can I put this to practice into my life. And when I read her book, came out in 2020, another full circle moment, by the way. When I first moved to New York, the first book event I ever went to in life was Layla Saad's book event. It was at the Strand bookstore. And I met Layla that night. We connected. She was lovely. The book was amazing. The whole event was amazing. While I'm at the bookstore, I had this visualization of one day I'm going to be at the Strand talking about my book. And literally, my first book event was at the Strand bookstore. Layla wrote a blurb for my book. It was just all the stars always aligning, right? but Anyway, so Layla did that in her book, and I thought it was so impactful and so powerful that I was like, whenever I write a book one day, I want to incorporate that because it's so meaningful, I think. And to your point, it really, I think, helps. We all read these books that we're like, oh, these are such great books. And then you kind of put it aside and you just forget about it. And I wanted this to be a book that people really sat with and hopefully put into practice in their lives.
I love that so much. And child, you and these visualizations, telling you, gosh, you're a conduit, a portal. As we wrap up here, and again, thank you so much for your time. I want to quickly get the information of how people can find you, where they can find the book, then
Mhm.
quickly do this giveaway prompt. So, where can everybody find Chrissy King?
Absolutely. So my website is chrissyking.com. You can subscribe to my newsletter that I try really hard to send out every week. I'm getting better at making sure it happens every week. On Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter, it's I am Chrissy King. And
Perfect.
the book, The Body Liberation Project, is available anywhere books are sold.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So to that end, I am giving away three of these books.
Amazing.
Here's yeah, absolutely. Here's I did the same thing with Amanda Thebe, her book Metapocalypse, which I really love. It's a space I work in. But and I'll have Molly on the show, in the next coming weeks, and I'll be giving away "Strong Women Lift Each Other Up."
Oh,
Uh,
can I say something really quickly about Molly? Molly
please do.
is the first person who ever paid me to write an article. I wrote my first paid article for Girls
Love it.
Strong, and it was and that was so cool. Again, did not get paid a lot, right? But what
Right.
was so cool about that, it was I was like, oh, someone will pay me for my words, and I tell her this all the time, how instrumental that was in my journey to believe in me and my capacity to be a writer.
Shout out to Molly.
Yeah, she's amazing.
Good friend. Um, so the parameters of this contest. So for those of you out there listening, all I want you to do, take a screenshot of your phone if you're listening to this podcast, upload it to your favorite social media, tag me in it on Instagram. I'm at Fitness Jones Training. On Facebook, I'm Fitness Jones Training. Twitter, basically the same. Upload a pic of a screenshot of you listening to this episode. I need to be able to see what the episode number is in the screenshot. This episode is airing. If you're listening to this, that means it is May 7th, whatever the first Sunday is in May. I'm not good with numbers and I try not to do math in public. But that Sunday you're listening to this, upload it. I'm going to give everyone until the following Wednesday to get their uploads up and tag me. Tag Chrissy if you want to. She wouldn't mind. I mean, she may not get to it, but it won't hurt anything. And I'm going to select three of those people, do a big whoop de doo on the internet with an announcement, and send those three books to three lucky winners. Chrissy King, thank you so much for being here. I sincerely appreciate your time. I appreciate the often difficult and challenging work that you're doing in this space. And it goes without saying, you're welcome here anytime. When you write that next book about the money that you made from racism in 2020, we'll have you on to debut and talk about that one as well. I appreciate you. I appreciate your diligence, your intelligence, and your capability to engage in uncomfortable things for the betterment of all the humans around you. Thank you for being here.
Oh my gosh, thank you for having me. This is a wonderful conversation. Thank you for being the first person to tell me what pissed them off about the book. I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you so much.
We appreciate you. I'm going to end this stream